It was a quiet morning in a small town just outside a big city. The streets were calm. Only a few cars passed by and the sun was beginning to warm up the sidewalks. A man walked slowly down the road, holding a leash in one hand and a cup of coffee in the other. His dog, a strong and loyal Belgian Malinois, trotted happily beside him. The dog's ears stood straight, alert to every sound, yet its tail wagged gently as it stayed close to its owner's side. To most people in the neighborhood, the man was just another quiet face they saw during their morning walks. He kept to himself, always polite but not one for long talks. No one knew much about him, and he liked it that way. He lived in a simple house on the edge of town, away from the noise, surrounded by a few trees and an old wooden fence. He had moved there a few years earlier, looking for peace and space. His life before that was something he never talked about. He didn't like to share stories of what he'd seen, what he'd done, or what he'd lost. People thought he was just a private man, maybe a retired worker or someone who preferred quiet living. But in truth, his past was far more complicated and far more powerful than anyone could guess. Every morning, his routine was the same. He'd wake up before sunrise, feed his dog, and go out for a walk. The air was cool, and the sky would slowly turn from dark blue to gold. That time of day was his favorite. It was the only time his mind felt calm, the only time the world around him matched the silence he carried inside. The dog, his only real companion, was more than just a pet. It was his family, his friend, his therapy. The two of them shared a bond that didn't need words. The man had trained the dog himself with care and patience. Every move, every look, every sound between them meant something. The dog could sense his moods, when he was calm, when he was tense, when his mind drifted into memories he didn't want to revisit. Sometimes, when he stopped to tie his shoe or look at the sky, the dog would sit beside him, head slightly tilted, watching him with quiet understanding. He'd smile softly then, pat the dog on the head and whisper something only they both knew. That morning everything felt normal. The man had no plans beyond his usual walk, maybe a few chores around the house later. He liked the stillness before the town woke up, before the lawnmowers started humming and children began to play outside. The sound of his footsteps and the click of the dog's claws on the sidewalk were the only noises around. He passed by a few familiar faces, an elderly couple watering their garden, a young mother jogging with a stroller, a man fixing his fence. They all waved and he nodded back politely. Most of them didn't even know his name, but they respected his quiet nature. He turned toward the small park at the end of the street. It wasn't big, just a few benches, some trees, and an open field where dogs like to run. He unclipped the leash and the Malinois ran a few feet ahead, sniffing the air, chasing the breeze. The man watched with a faint smile. This was his favorite moment of every day, watching his dog be free, strong, and happy. While the dog ran, he sat on a bench and took a sip of his coffee. A warm breeze brushed his face. He felt the sun's first light touch his skin. For a few minutes, he forgot everything else. The memories that still haunted him. The years of strict training. The moments when survival meant more than emotion. He had spent most of his life serving quietly in ways few could imagine. He'd been trained to stay calm when chaos broke out, to act when others froze, to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. He'd seen places most people only knew from headlines, places filled with noise, fear, and dust. But he never spoke of any of it. When he came home for good, it took time to adjust to normal life. The silence at night felt heavier than the sounds of battle. He found comfort in structure and small habits that gave his day meaning. And most of all, he found comfort in his dog, the one creature that didn't judge him, didn't ask questions, and didn't look at him with curiosity or pity. The man often thought about how strange it was that people only saw what they wanted to see. Neighbors saw a quiet man with a dog, maybe a little lonely, maybe a little distant, but they didn't see the discipline in the way he walked, the way he noticed every small movement, or the way he positioned himself near open spaces, always aware of exits and angles. Years of training never truly leave the body. That morning as he sat there, he noticed a police car drive slowly past the park entrance. It didn't mean much and they often patrolled the area. But he noticed everything, always had. He watched for a moment, then turned back to his dog, who was now sitting proudly in the grass, tongue out, eyes bright. The man smiled again. He called his dog back softly and the animal came running, happy and full of life. He clipped the leash back on, gave the dog a treat, and stood up to head home. He didn't know that somewhere nearby a misunderstanding was already forming, one that would change his quiet life forever. But at that moment, all he knew was peace. The simple rhythm of footsteps, the sound of a bird in the distance, the way the dog brushed against his leg as they walked, to him that was enough. He didn't crave attention or recognition. He didn't need medals or applause. He had already done his part in the world. Now he just wanted peace. As he walked, a car pulled up near the corner. He didn't pay much attention to it. The dog's ears perked up, but the man gave a small command and the animal relaxed again. The car's windows were tinted and the sound of voices came faintly from inside. The man kept walking, unaware that this small moment would soon lead to something much bigger than he expected. At home, his yard was quiet. The dog went straight to the porch and sat down, waiting patiently for him to open the door. Inside, the house was simple but clean. The walls held a few pictures, not of war or medals, but of nature, mountains, and open skies. A few old books sat on the shelf, most about history, discipline, and survival. He placed his coffee cup in the sink and knelt to remove the dog's collar. The animal wagged its tail and leaned close for a pat. He smiled and whispered, "Good boy." Those words were part of their morning ritual. After breakfast, he sat by the window, watching as the sun rose higher. He didn't know that a neighbor, seeing a man in dark clothing and a big dog earlier, had made a nervous call to the police. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe just fear. But that one small decision would soon start a chain of events that no one could stop. For now, everything was calm. The man sat quietly, lost in thought. The dog lay at his feet, eyes half closed. The peaceful rhythm of their home was steady, soft breathing, the faint hum of morning life outside. To anyone watching, it was an ordinary morning. But behind that calm face was a lifetime of strength, patience, and pain. The man had faced danger that most could never imagine. Yet the one thing he truly feared was losing the small bit of peace he had finally found. He didn't know that peace would soon be tested in ways that would reveal everything he'd tried so hard to keep hidden. His past, his identity, and the quiet power that lived inside him. That afternoon felt quiet like any other. But something small was off. A feeling the man couldn't quite explain. The air seemed heavier and even his dog sensed it. The animal's ears flicked toward every little sound, the way it always did when something unfamiliar was near. The man didn't think much of it. He had learned to trust his instincts over the years, but sometimes he reminded himself that not every strange feeling meant danger. He took a deep breath and told himself to relax. After all, he had come here to live a peaceful life. He stepped outside to check the mail, his loyal dog walking right beside him. The mailbox was at the edge of his yard near the sidewalk. Across the street, a car was parked, the same one he had noticed earlier that morning. Two people sat inside. He didn't know them, but he nodded politely, the way he always did. Inside the car, the people were watching him, talking quietly. One of them lifted a small radio and spoke into it. The man didn't hear the words, but he noticed the motion. Again, he didn't react. He had learned long ago that the best way to stay calm was to control his breathing and never let emotion lead his actions. A few minutes later, another car appeared, this one clearly marked with police colors. It stopped slowly at the corner. The man's dog stood beside him, alert but relaxed. The animal didn't bark or pull on the leash. It simply watched. The man's heartbeat slowed slightly. He didn't like unexpected visits, but he wasn't the kind to cause trouble. Maybe they were just asking questions or checking on something in the neighborhood. He decided to stay calm and friendly. The officer stepped out of the car. They looked young, maybe new to the job. One of them adjusted his vest nervously. The other placed a hand on his belt and started walking toward the man. "Afternoon," the first officer said. His tone was cautious but polite. "We got a call about someone walking around earlier with a large dog. Just wanted to make sure everything's all right." The man gave a small nod. "Everything's fine," he said quietly. His voice was steady, calm. "We take a walk here every morning." The officer glanced at the dog. "Is he friendly?" "He's trained," the man replied. "Very well trained." The second officer shifted his stance, looking uncertain. The man noticed the small movements, the way the officer's eyes moved between him and the dog, the slight tension in his shoulders. It wasn't hostility, just nervousness. The man had seen that kind of tension many times before. in people who weren't sure what to expect, who wanted to do the right thing but didn't yet know how to handle a situation calmly. He decided to make things easier for them. He gave a quiet command and the dog sat beside him, completely still. "He won't move until I tell him," the man said gently. That seemed to help. The first officer relaxed a little. "All right, sir. Appreciate that. We just had a report and needed to check. Some folks get nervous when they see a big dog." The man nodded. "Understandable," he said. "He's protective but never aggressive. He's trained for obedience." The second officer looked around, scanning the quiet street. A couple of neighbors peeked from their porches, curious about what was going on. The man noticed them but said nothing. The first officer looked back at him. "Can we see some ID, sir?" "Just routine, of course," the man said calmly. He reached slowly into his back pocket and handed over his wallet. He moved deliberately, careful not to make any sudden gestures. Years of experience had taught him that calmness always mattered in tense moments. The officer took the ID and looked at it. His eyes scanned the name and address. He didn't recognize the name, of course. Few people would. It wasn't a name that appeared on social media or in public news. As the officer walked back to the car to check the record, the second one stayed near the man. The dog remained seated, eyes focused on its owner. "You train dogs professionally?" the second officer asked, trying to fill the silence. The man smiled faintly. "Something like that," he said. The radio in the police car crackled softly. The first officer was listening to something coming through his earpiece. The man could see his expression shift slightly, a look of surprise, then a quiet seriousness. He said something back into the radio and then walked quickly toward his partner. The man didn't know exactly what was being said, but he could guess. His background wasn't something that stayed hidden once someone ran his name. It often brought questions, sometimes even awkward silence. The first officer spoke quietly to his partner, who glanced briefly at the man, then back at his colleague. Their tone changed, softer, more careful. The man didn't mind. He had learned that people treated him differently once they knew who he was. Some looked up to him. Others grew nervous. He never asked for either reaction. He just wanted to be treated like anyone else. After a moment, the first officer came back. "Everything checks out, sir. Sorry for the trouble. We just had to make sure." "No problem," the man said politely. They stood there for a second, unsure of what to say next. The officer looked down at the dog again. "He's a beautiful animal," he said. "Thank you," the man replied. "He's my partner." There was a small pause, not uncomfortable, just quiet. Then the officers nodded, said their goodbyes, and walked back to the car. The man watched them drive away. The dog stayed still until given the release word. When the man spoke softly, the animal stood up, tail wagging. The man took a deep breath and looked up at the sky. It was clear, blue, and peaceful, but inside he felt a strange unease. The whole interaction had been harmless, yet something about it left him unsettled. He couldn't explain why. Later that day, he received a polite visit from the local department, a higher-ranking officer who wanted to apologize personally for the confusion. They stood on his porch, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the yard. "We're sorry for the misunderstanding," the officer said. "You fit the description of someone we were trying to locate earlier. It was just bad timing." The man nodded. "I understand," he said. "It happens." The officer hesitated. "You served, didn't you?" "Yes," the man replied simply. "I thought so," the officer said. "My brother did too. I recognize that calm way you handle yourself. You don't see that often." The man gave a faint smile. "Old habits," he said. The conversation ended with a handshake and a quiet promise that things would be smoother next time. When the car drove off, the man stood on his porch for a while, his dog sitting beside him as always. The sun was beginning to set. The light turned golden, painting the trees and rooftops in warm color. It was beautiful, peaceful again. But deep inside, the man couldn't shake a strange thought. How quickly simple misunderstanding could grow into something serious. He sat on the steps with his dog, resting his hand gently on the animal's back. "We're okay," he said softly. "Just a mix-up." The dog looked up at him, eyes calm as if it understood every word. That night, the man had trouble sleeping. He lay in bed listening to the sound of crickets outside, his mind turning over the day's events. The young officers had meant no harm, he knew that. But he also knew how fear and quick judgment could change everything in a single second. He thought about how little people really knew about others. To the world, he was just another face. But behind that face was a man who had lived through situations far more dangerous than anyone around him could imagine. Yet here, in his quiet town, he felt more fragile than ever. Not because of danger, but because of how easily people could misunderstand what they saw. He looked down at his dog, sleeping peacefully by the bed. "You and me," he whispered. "Always." In that soft moment, he made a silent promise to stay calm no matter what came next, to meet every situation with patience, not anger. He believed that peace was something you had to fight for, quietly and every day. As he closed his eyes, he didn't know that the misunderstanding that had started so small wasn't truly over. It was just the beginning of something that would soon test everything he believed in: his patience, his discipline, and his quiet strength. The next morning started quiet, but it didn't feel the same. The man could sense a change in the air, something unseen but heavy. His dog was calm, yet every now and then its ears would lift toward faint sounds down the street. The man had learned to trust those instincts. Animals always noticed things before people did. He tried to ignore the feeling and carried on with his normal morning routine. He brewed his coffee, opened the window to let in the cool air, and watched the sunlight touch the tops of the trees. For a moment, it almost felt peaceful again. He looked at his dog resting on the porch, head on its paws, eyes bright and alert. The sight brought him a quiet sense of comfort. That animal had been through everything with him. Every lonely night, every bad dream, every long walk when his mind refused to rest. He reached down, scratched the dog behind the ears, and said softly, "We're okay." It was something he often said out loud, not because the dog needed to hear it, but because he needed to remind himself. The memory of the officer's visit still lingered in his thoughts. He knew they hadn't meant any harm. They were just doing their job. But the idea that a simple mistake could cause so much confusion stayed with him. He wondered how often these kinds of things happened. How often people were judged by what they looked like rather than who they truly were. Later that morning, a knock came at his door. It startled him mostly because it was rare. He didn't get many visitors. When he opened it, a man stood there wearing a suit. Calm expression, kind eyes. Behind him was another officer, older, with a respectful tone. "Good morning," the man in the suit said. "Sorry to bother you. I'm with the department. We wanted to follow up about what happened yesterday." The man nodded and stepped aside. "Of course. Come in." They walked into his small living room. The dog sat quietly near the door, watching but not moving. "We just wanted to make sure everything's all right," the suited man said. "There's been some confusion about a report. It seems someone nearby called again this morning. We believe it's a misunderstanding, but we wanted to check personally." The man gave a small sigh. "I appreciate that," he said calmly. "I've lived here for years without trouble. My dog and I keep to ourselves." The officer nodded. "We understand. Some neighbors don't know your background. We looked into it, and well, it's impressive." The man looked away, almost embarrassed. "That's all in the past," he said quietly. "Still," the officer said, "it's important. It helps us understand who you are. We wish we'd known before. Maybe yesterday would have gone smoother." The man gave a faint smile. "It's not something I talk about," he said. "I came here to live quietly, not to be recognized." The suited man smiled back. "Quiet is good," he said. "We just want to make sure you have it." They talked a little longer, about the neighborhood, about the weather, about how sometimes good people still get caught in small misunderstandings. Before they left, the officer reached down to pet the dog. "Beautiful animal," he said. The dog leaned in gently, calm and trusting. After they left, the man stood for a long moment at the door, thinking. It was strange, he thought, how quickly life could shift. One day everything was peaceful. The next, it felt like every small sound meant something more. He took his dog for another walk that afternoon. The sky was gray and the wind was colder than usual. As they walked, he noticed more cars than normal on his street. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe people were just curious after seeing police the day before, but it made him uneasy. At the park, he sat on the same bench as always. A few kids were playing in the distance, and an older man fed pigeons near the fountain. Everything looked normal, yet he couldn't shake the feeling that something was still hanging in the air. He thought about his past again, something he rarely allowed himself to do. All those years of training, All those times he had to stay calm under pressure. That part of him never left. It was still there, beneath the quiet life he had built. He had been trained to protect, to lead, to stay strong even when everything fell apart. But this was different. Here, in his peaceful town, strength meant staying calm in small human ways. Not reacting to fear, not letting misunderstanding grow into something worse. The dog lay beside his feet, breathing softly. The man reached down and touched its head. "You're my peace," he said quietly. When they returned home, the sun was already setting. The man sat on his porch, sipping tea instead of coffee this time. The air smelled like rain, and the sound of distant thunder rolled across the sky. He didn't notice at first, but a car slowed down near his driveway. It wasn't the same one from before, but the movement caught his attention. The windows were rolled down slightly, and someone inside seemed to be watching him. He stood still, not moving closer, not backing away. He didn't want to assume anything. Eventually, the car drove off, disappearing around the corner. He exhaled slowly. Maybe it was nothing again. But deep inside, that quiet sense of alertness, the one that had kept him alive through many dangerous years, began to stir. The next day, things felt calmer. No knocks, no visitors. He spent the morning fixing small things around the house. A loose board on the porch, a creaky door hinge, little tasks that helped him think. The dog stayed nearby, following him from room to room like a shadow. Every so often, he'd stop and look out the window. He didn't know why, but he couldn't help checking. The street looked peaceful. Children riding bikes, a mail truck stopping at houses, nothing unusual. That night, the man sat in his favorite chair by the window. The dog rested by his feet as usual. He opened a small box he kept in the drawer beside him. Inside were old medals, neatly arranged, and a few pictures. Faces of people he once knew, people he'd served with. He looked at them quietly for a while. Those faces brought back both pride and pain. They reminded him of who he had been, but also why he had chosen this quiet life. He closed the box and placed it back in the drawer. He didn't need those reminders anymore. What mattered to him now was here, the house, the quiet, and the loyal animal at his feet. As he sat there, the sound of a car engine hummed faintly outside. He turned his head, curious. It wasn't unusual for cars to pass, but this one seemed to stop near his driveway again. He walked slowly to the porch and looked out. A police car. The lights weren't flashing, but it was clearly the same kind that had come before. He stepped outside, his dog walking beside him. The door of the car opened and a familiar face appeared, one of the young officers from before. "Evening, sir," the officer said politely. "Sorry to stop by again."
We had another call.
"Same address. Just wanted to make sure you're all right." The man nodded calmly. "I'm fine. Everything's peaceful here." The officer seemed uneasy, maybe embarrassed. "It's probably just the same neighbor," he said. "Some folks get nervous for no reason." The man gave a small smile. "Fear is powerful," he said softly. "Sometimes it makes people see danger where there isn't any." The officer nodded. "You're right about that." They stood in silence for a moment, the cool night air brushing past them. The dog sat between them, calm and quiet. The officer finally said, "If you ever need anything, don't hesitate to call. We know who you are now. We'll make sure you're treated with respect." The man nodded again. "Thank you. I just want peace." When the officer drove off, the man stood on the porch staring out into the night. The streetlights flickered softly. The sound of crickets filled the air. Everything looked calm again, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was still building. Something unseen, waiting for the wrong moment to appear. He went inside, locked the door gently, and sat down beside his dog once more. The animal looked up, tail wagging slowly. The man reached out and whispered, "We'll be okay." The words hung in the air, soft but sure. He didn't know that life was about to test those words in ways he couldn't imagine, not through war or danger, but through something even more personal, the challenge of staying calm when the world refuses to understand you. The days that followed felt strange. The man noticed people looking at him differently. Some offered polite smiles, others avoided eye contact. News traveled fast in small towns even when no one really knew the full story. A few neighbors stopped by, pretending to make small talk, but he could tell they were curious. They had seen the police cars, heard small pieces of gossip, and wanted to fill in the blanks. He stayed kind, patient, and calm, giving short answers without inviting too many questions. He didn't want attention. He wanted quiet. He spent more time walking with his dog, mostly early in the morning or late in the evening when fewer people were outside. The park was still his favorite place and open, calm, and full of space to breathe. His dog ran with the same excitement as always, but the man carried a different kind of weight inside. He had learned long ago that peace isn't something you're given. It's something you build and protect day by day. One afternoon, as he was fixing the small fence by his yard, a car pulled up again. This time it wasn't the police. It was a dark sedan, quiet engine, tinted windows. The man recognized the way it moved, slow and steady, not like a casual visitor. When the window rolled down, he saw a familiar face, someone from his past. A man in a plain suit, clean haircut, and eyes that carried too many memories. "Mind if I come in?" the man asked. "Sure," he replied softly. They sat on the porch. The visitor looked around, taking in the simplicity of the place, in the old chair, the small garden, the loyal dog resting nearby. "You've done well for yourself," the visitor said. "Quiet life suits you?" "That's the idea," the man replied. The visitor nodded. "We heard about what happened. Word reached people who still remember your work. You okay?" "I'm fine," he said. "It was just a mix-up. Happens all the time," the visitor sighed. "Still, it shouldn't have. People should know who they're dealing with before they act." The man shook his head. "No, I don't want to be treated differently. I'm not that person anymore." For a while, they sat in silence. The sound of the wind moved through the trees, and the dog lifted its head, watching them. "You know," the visitor said quietly, "some of the people you trained still talk about you. The things you did, the discipline, the courage. You never lost control, not even once." The man looked at the ground. "I lost plenty, just not where people could see it." The visitor smiled faintly, understanding. "Still the same as ever," he said. When the car finally left, the man stood alone on the porch again. The sun was dipping low, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. The dog came to his side, brushing against his leg. He reached down and whispered, "We're almost through this," but in truth, something else was happening, something far beyond his control. That evening, news about the misunderstanding began spreading online. Someone had posted a short clip, part of the officer's first visit filmed from across the street. It didn't show much, just a man standing calmly with his dog while two officers talked to him. But the caption was dramatic, and within hours people started sharing it. By the next day, the clip had thousands of views. People commented, made guesses, argued about what really happened. Some defended him, saying he handled things perfectly. Others made assumptions, adding details that weren't true. The man didn't even know about the video until a neighbor told him. He watched it once and turned it off. He had spent his life avoiding the spotlight. Now it was finding him anyway. Soon, reporters started calling the local police department. They wanted to know who the man was. Someone leaked a hint, just enough for people to realize he wasn't just a quiet retiree. Within a few days, his story became public. Articles appeared calling him a decorated veteran and a former elite commander. They praised his calmness, his history, his service. But to him, it felt like an invasion. He hadn't asked for attention or recognition. He just wanted peace. Neighbors started leaving notes on his porch. Kind words, thank yous, even small gifts for his dog. Some veterans from nearby towns came to shake his hand, sharing stories of their own. He appreciated their kindness, but deep inside, he missed the quiet. He had built his life to escape noise, and now it had found him again in a different form. One evening, as the sun went down, a local news van parked outside his house. A reporter stepped out holding a microphone. She smiled politely and said, "Sir, people across the country are talking about you. Would you mind sharing a few words for everyone watching?" He looked at her kindly and said, "There's not much to say. I'm just a man who loves his dog and values peace. That's all." She smiled, maybe expecting more, but he gave her nothing else. He didn't want to turn pain into a headline. After she left, he sat on the porch watching the sky fade into night. His dog lay beside him, head resting on his foot. He thought about the strange way life worked, how you could spend years running toward peace, and the world would still find a way to pull you back into its noise. The next few days brought more attention. People online debated his story. Some called him a hero. Others questioned the details. But he stayed quiet. He didn't read the comments. He didn't answer calls. He just kept walking his dog, fixing his fence, and living his small life the way he always had. One morning, he got a visit from the police chief. The man was older, respectful, and clearly troubled by everything that had happened. "I owe you an apology," the chief said. "We made mistakes. We didn't see you for who you were, and we didn't handle things the way we should have." The man shook his head gently. "You don't owe me anything," he said. "I've seen worse misunderstandings. The important thing is how you learn from them." The chief nodded. "That's exactly what we're doing. We're updating how we respond to calls like that. Your situation opened our eyes." The man smiled faintly. Then something good came from it. That night he sat outside again with his dog, watching the stars. For the first time in days, the world felt quiet. He thought about everything that had happened. The confusion, the attention, the way strangers suddenly cared about his story. He didn't want fame. He didn't want people to see him as a symbol. He wanted them to understand that peace doesn't come from medals or rank. It comes from how you live after everything else is over. The dog stirred beside him, tail thumping softly against the porch. He reached down and patted its head. "Still with me?" he said quietly. The wind moved through the trees, and for a moment everything felt right again. But deep down, he knew that even good attention came with a cost. Once people started seeing you as a story, it was hard to go back to being invisible. He didn't regret staying calm through it all. He believed calmness was its own kind of strength, the kind that could teach others how to handle fear and misunderstanding without anger. He wanted to use what had happened for something better. Not revenge, not noise, but change. In the days that followed, people began reaching out with ideas. A few veterans contacted him asking for guidance. A local group suggested starting a small program to help train police officers on how to approach service dogs and veterans with PTSD. At first, he hesitated. He didn't want to be the center of anything. But then he thought of all the people who might find comfort in what he had learned. The quiet ones, the misunderstood ones. The ones still trying to find peace in everyday life. Maybe this was the reason everything had happened. Maybe his story could help others feel seen without having to speak too much. He looked at his dog again and whispered, "Maybe we can make something good out of all this." The animal wagged its tail softly, as if agreeing. And for the first time since everything began, the man felt a new kind of calm, not the silence of hiding, but the peace that comes when you decide to turn pain into purpose. Weeks turned into months, and the noise around the man's story slowly faded. News channels moved on to new topics. Social media lost interest, and life in the small town began to settle again. The man was grateful for that silence. He had never wanted to be a headline or a symbol. He wanted what he had always wanted: peace, space, and time to live quietly with his dog. But even though the attention faded, something inside him had changed. He started noticing more people walking their dogs at the park, more neighbors greeting him with genuine warmth instead of curiosity. The air between people felt softer somehow, more understanding. One afternoon, as he sat under the old oak tree at the park, an older man approached him with a leash in one hand and a small brown dog trotting beside him. The man smiled politely and asked if he could sit. "Of course," he said. They sat together for a while, just watching their dogs chase each other through the grass. Then the visitor spoke quietly. "I heard about what happened to you. I just wanted to say thank you. My brother's a veteran too. He saw your story online and it helped him a lot. He said it reminded him that staying calm doesn't mean you're weak." The man smiled softly. "I'm glad he feels that way," he said. The visitor nodded, emotion in his eyes. "He used to be angry all the time. Didn't trust anyone, but after he saw you handle everything the way you did, he started walking again, talking to people. It gave him hope." The man looked out across the park. The wind moved through the trees, carrying the sound of laughter from children playing nearby. "I'm happy for him," he said quietly. "Sometimes all we need is a reminder that peace is still possible." The visitor smiled, stood, and offered his hand. "You gave people that reminder." After he left, the man sat for a while longer, thinking about those words. He hadn't planned on giving anyone hope, but maybe that was how life worked. The lessons you live through quietly can still help others without you ever realizing it. Later that week, he got a call from the local community center. They were organizing a small event for veterans and first responders, and someone had suggested inviting him to speak. At first, he wanted to say no. Public speaking wasn't something he enjoyed. But then he thought about the man in the park and his brother, and how simple words could sometimes reach people in ways you didn't expect. He agreed. The event was small. Maybe 50 people gathered in a hall that smelled faintly of coffee and fresh paint. Folding chairs lined up neatly, a small stage at the front, and a microphone that looked older than the building itself. When it was his turn to speak, he stood slowly, walked up to the front and looked out at the faces waiting for him. There were men and women of all ages, some wearing old uniforms, others sitting quietly with folded hands. He didn't prepare a speech. He just spoke from the heart. "I'm not here to talk about what happened to me," he began softly. "I'm here to talk about what came after." He paused, letting the room grow still. "For a long time I thought strength was something you showed only in battle. But I've learned that real strength is quiet. It's in the way you keep calm when life tests you. It's in the way you forgive people who don't understand you. It's in the way you keep walking, even when the world feels like it's watching." He looked around the room and continued. "We all carry things we don't talk about. We all have scars that don't show. But peace isn't something you wait for. It's something you build. Every day, one small moment at a time," he smiled faintly. "And sometimes peace looks a lot like sitting under a tree with your dog just breathing." When he finished, the room was silent. Then slowly, people began to clap. Not the loud kind of applause that fills a room, but the gentle, grateful kind that comes from people who truly understand. Afterward, several people came to talk to him. Some thanked him quietly. Others shared small pieces of their own stories. He listened to each one, never rushing, never interrupting. He knew that sometimes people didn't need advice, they just needed to be heard. That night, as he walked home with his dog trotting beside him, he felt lighter than he had in years. Not because anything had been fixed, but because something inside him had finally settled. He realized he had spent so much of his life protecting others, his team, his country, his community, that he had forgotten what it meant to protect his own peace. Now he was learning. A few weeks later, he started volunteering at the community center. He didn't talk much about his past, but people respected him instantly. He helped train local officers on how to approach veterans calmly, how to recognize service dogs, and how to communicate without fear or assumption. The sessions were quiet, personal, and full of small, meaningful conversations. He didn't raise his voice or show off his background. He just shared what he'd learned, that empathy could stop mistakes before they began, and that respect could save more lives than weapons ever could. Word spread about those training sessions. Nearby towns began inviting him to speak. At first he hesitated again, but each time he accepted, he noticed something changing, not just in others, but in himself. He was finding purpose again, not in uniform, not in orders, but in connection, in helping people see the human side of every story. One morning, as he walked his dog through the park, he noticed a group of young officers jogging past. They nodded respectfully as they passed him. One of them slowed down, smiled, and said, "Morning, sir. We had your session last week. It changed the way I see things." He nodded with a small smile. "Good. That's how it starts." The officer grinned and jogged away, and the man watched him go with quiet pride. He sat on his usual bench, the one under the big oak tree. His dog lay beside him, panting softly after a long run. The sunlight filtered through the leaves, warm and golden. He took a deep breath, feeling the peace around him, not the kind that comes from silence alone, but the kind that grows when you've made peace with your own story. He thought about everything that had happened, the misunderstanding, the noise, the headlines, the people who came and went. It all felt far away now, like a storm that had finally passed. He smiled to himself. Life had a strange way of teaching lessons. Sometimes it threw chaos at you just to remind you what calm really meant. A little girl ran by, chasing a ball, laughing, her dog barking happily behind her. The man watched for a moment, his smile widening. It was such a simple scene, but it carried everything he believed in: trust, love, and peace. His dog nudged his hand, and he reached down to pat its head. "You did good," he said softly. "We both did." The dog wagged its tail as if it understood.